Welcome to the Truth and Liberty broadcast. We believe we have a mandate to bring godly change to our nation and the world through the 7 spheres or mountains of influence. To further this cause, we give away a product every week that will empower you to get involved in changing your life and changing our world. You can register for our weekly giveaway by subscribing at truthandliberty.net. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to receive weekly updates on guests, news, and much more. This is an interactive live cast, and we welcome your questions. To ask a question during the live cast, use the comment or chat features. Now get ready to dive into this week's topics with our hosts on location in Colorado, USA.
Hello everybody, and welcome to the Truth and Liberty livecast. I'm Richard Harris, and it is just really great to have you watching tonight. My co-host tonight is Karen Conrad. Karen's helping us tonight from Dallas, Texas, and it's so good to have you with us, Karen.
Thank you. It's so good to be with you, Richard. Thank you.
And we are really excited tonight. Our guest this evening is Michael Farris. Mr. Farris is the president and CEO of Alliance Defending Freedom. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about Mike Farris here in just a second and give him a proper introduction. But if you're watching right now, I want you guys to get something, sit down, tune in, get family and friends around. You're not going to want to miss this live cast because I promise you, you're going to learn some things about the United States Constitution, about the Supreme Court, about the situation we are in as a nation right now. And this is going to be fantastic. So Mike, it's great to have you with us too. And right now, we're just going to pitch it over to Karen. She's got some important information to share with everybody. And so Karen, why don't you take it away?
Great. Thank you so much, and welcome everybody. Richard, I totally agree. This is going to be an awesome program and something that we all need to take part in as we face some of the crisis that we are in the nation. So I want to encourage you, first of all, if you are watching on Facebook, we want to welcome you, but I'll tell you the best viewing experience for you is to go to truthandliberty.net. That's the website, and it is so full of resources, and in that information, you're able to find out what's happening in current events. It's sort of like a news source, and so join us there at truthandliberty.net. And there's a lot of updates that happen on that website. Richard does an amazing job of just going through and keeping us updated, and I want to share a few of those items with you. So on the Truth and Liberty website, there are very many valuable resources, and one of the most recent ones is that Andrew Womack penned a letter to Governor Polis in Colorado, and it's a letter where he really wanted churches open in Colorado. So he had over 700 signatures, I believe, Richard, with that letter. And if you want to take a look at the letter that Andrew wrote, it's on truthandliberty.net. And I believe many of the churches, Richard, opened up yesterday, right?
That's right. Yeah, here in Colorado, I don't know how many churches opened. I do know that we had over 700 signatures on that letter, and we submitted it to Governor Polis and the public health director last week. It was so encouraging to see pastors come together and take a stand for our rights under the Constitution.
Awesome. Also, there's a COVID guide for churches to help you navigate through the rules and the guidelines. There's some new Right to Life resources in the Research Center, the iVoter Guide. This is got to be the most critical election of our lifetime, if not the history of our country. And so get informed, find out what's happening through a biblical perspective at truthandliberty.net. Plus, there are multiple episodes. If you've missed any of Truth and Liberty, you can go to the archives and watch past episodes of Truth and Liberty. So check it out. One of the special things about the Truth and Liberty livecast is we interact with you. We want to hear from you. We want to take your questions and answer what is on your mind. So if you are watching on Facebook, it's very simple. Just enter your question in the comments. We've got a whole team standing by. They send those questions forward. And if you're watching on awmi.net or truthandliberty.net, you can enter that question in the chat section, and we will answer as many questions as possible. And any of them that we didn't get to tonight, though we try to answer as many as we can, Richard does a follow-up every Monday and answers more of those questions for you. There's several events that are coming up at Andrew Wommack Ministries and Charis Bible College that you don't want to miss. And this one is very special, the Truth and Liberty Coalition Conference, June 5th through the 6th. You can register to attend at truthandliberty.net/conference. And we're so excited. We've got James Robinson, Andrew, Mark Cowart, Mark Gonzalez, and more. It's going to be an amazing conference. Also coming up on June 29th to July 3rd is the Summer Family Bible Conference. This is truly a family favorite. So come on to Colorado and bring your family. We've also got a very special In God We Trust performance on July 4th. And to register for that, you can go to truthandliberty.net/conferences and see all the events coming up. And then July 10th through the 11th, Andrew is hosting the Kingdom Youth Conference. The speakers are Andrew Wommack, Carrie Pickett, Bill Federer, Greg Moore, Bill Epperhart, and many, many more. You don't want to miss it. So bring your children, your grandchildren, bring your youth and attend, and you can register there at truthandliberty.net/conference. Also, there's some really exciting things that we do on Truth and Liberty each week, including a giveaway of a product. So last week's winner, we want to congratulate Robin Carlton. Robin, you won How to Follow God's Will. It's an amazing CD teaching by Andrew Wommack. So we'll be sending that your way. Oh, and this week's product, Richard, I'm sure you'll be holding this up. It's one of my favorites, A Better Way to Pray by Andrew Wommack.
Yeah, this is a great book, folks. It starts off with the line, hypocrites love to pray. So if that doesn't get your attention, I don't know what will. But it's a fantastic book. It can actually revolutionize your prayer life and your relationship with God. So subscribe today and be eligible for that.
Absolutely. And of course, Andrew signs those, which is really great. So to be eligible for this gift is either, as Richard mentioned, you subscribe. And if you're already subscribed to Truth and Liberty, you're in the drawing every week. So A Better Way to Pray. Also, we want to encourage you, this is a viewer-supported live cast. And so if this is a blessing to you or something that you believe in, we invite you to give to Truth and Liberty. Now, it's not tax deductible, and Richard can explain a little bit more about that, but I'll tell you, the seed that you are sowing will reap an amazing harvest. And if you want to give to support these live casts, go to truthandliberty.net/donate. Also, we always have prayer ministers standing by. During these times, there's a lot of emotions, fear, just wondering what's ahead of us. And sometimes we need encouragement, especially in seeing things through the lens of the Word of God. So if you would like support, have questions, or would want prayer, call 719-635-1111, and you will be connected to an amazing prayer minister. So with that, Richard, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce our guest tonight, Mike Farris.
Oh, thank you, Karen. It's such a blessing in it to have Karen Conrad with us tonight. I didn't say this when I started. I should have. Karen is actually one of the founders of Truth and Liberty and currently is one of the officers still of Truth and Liberty. So it's always good to have her back. But it's my privilege and honor tonight to be able to introduce you guys to Michael Farris. Mike is he's a general in the culture war, one of the pioneers in America, really standing up for biblical values in the culture and standing up for freedom and really the biblical foundation of freedom. And his accomplishments are far too many to mention tonight. We're just really blessed and honored to have him with us. Let me just say, Mike is the president and CEO of Alliance Defending Freedom, which in my estimation is one of the top-tier leading public interest law firms in the country that represents people whose civil rights, particularly freedom of religion, freedom of speech, are under attack. Is the founder of Patrick Henry College, which trains more culture warriors, isn't that right, Mike? And I think also is the founder of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. So, man, that's more than a lifetime's amount of work, and he's still at it today. So, Mike, it's so good to have you with us.
Richard, it is always a pleasure to be with you. Really enjoyed the opportunity tonight.
So you've had an amazing career as an attorney, Mike. One of the things I didn't mention, you've even testified several times before Congress. And how is it that you became so involved in standing up for religious freedom and freedom of speech? How did that happen for you?
Well, it started when I was in the fourth grade, I guess. I was interested in being a lawyer. I saw Christian issues being of concern to my church and my family. And my dad said that to me one day when I was fourth grade, if you want to get involved in these kind of issues, Mike, you need to become a lawyer. And so I set out to do that. And in 1980, I began to work full time on these issues. I started a state-based organization in Washington State working on right to life, religious freedom, moral sanity kind of issues. And then I got hired to go do something similar for Tim and Beverly Hay in Washington, D.C. for a few years. And then other things just took off from there. But the Lord gave me an opportunity at a very young age. I was just barely out of law school when I was very much engaged in a full-time basis on these kinds of issues, litigating against the extension of the Equal Rights Amendment before I was 3 years out of law school. So it was a pretty heady thing because, frankly, in those days, there weren't any organizations like ADF or any of the other good groups that are out there now, Freedom Council, First Liberty, and others that do good work also. None of those things existed, and it was a wide open field. And I just said, okay, I'll go try.
Wow, that's fantastic. Well, so if you go all the way back to 1980, what is that? That's 40 years you've been in the war, in the fight, if you will. And I hope it's okay if I use those words. I think we are in a culture war. And how are we doing in this war, Mike? Is the tide turning? Are we winning, losing? Where do we stand?
We've won some things. I mean, for example, homeschooling, one thing I worked on for a long time, was illegal everywhere in the country 35 years ago. But it's legal, recognized as legal everywhere in the country now. Now, I have to say that according to the Constitution, it was legal all the time. But in the government officials' viewpoint, that was a perspective I was sharing there. They thought it was illegal in the mid-'80s, and eventually that all changed. And so we're making some progress on right to life. We're making a lot of good progress on freedom of speech. Religious freedom, still a big battle. Some of the moral issues, gay marriage, and things, we're in the thick of a very difficult battle. And so it's a mixed bag, but I don't expect any of this to go away. I expect we have to stand for liberty, but the thing I know is 40 years ago, the church was largely silent. And as we wake up and we stand up and we speak up and we show up, then good things start happening. So I believe that we can win these issues and win them big time. I believe, for example, that America can be a pro-life America in all 50 states, that we can reverse Roe and install pro-life rules in all 50 states. And it's difficult, it's uphill, it's hard work, it's a battle, but it can be done with the power of God.
Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome. Here at Charis Bible College and Andrew Womack Ministries, we started a program. Andrew started a program at the college in the third year called the School of Practical Government with David Barton, and I had the privilege of being able to help set that up. And one of the things that I teach the students in that school is, we conservatives and Christians, we don't have an appreciation for the long haul in this battle, this war that we're in. We think, if we can just win the next election and elect the right president, then we're going to win. It struck me as I was looking at history that the secularists and the Marxists and those who want to purge God from our society, they have a long-term view. And they've actually been at it for, I don't know, you could say maybe over 100 years. What's your perspective on that, Mike? Do we all need to understand that we're in a long-term war here?
We're in a perpetual war. And the kinds of victories that we want these days, the need for them results from decades of Christian neglect. Bible-believing Christians have neglected their civic duties. The Bible tells us to have lots of roles in our our life. Yes, we share the gospel, but we're also supposed to be good parents. We're also supposed to be good citizens, and our responsibilities there are just that. They're the responsibilities, opportunities that God has given us, and too much is given, much is expected. We've given the responsibility of helping to govern this country through the constitutional Republican process. And we have to take that responsibility and exercise it honorably and with diligence and with excellence. And, and it makes a difference. It can and will make a difference over time. We didn't get in this mess overnight, and we're not going to get out of the mess overnight. But I think we can get to a position where we're prevailing on many of these issues in 10 to 12 to 15 years. And, I think some of them we can prevail on quicker than that. But we're going to have some interim victories along the way, but we need to be on the march toward big victories that really will shape the nation and preserve freedom for generations to come.
Well, that's fantastic. So I'd like for you to share a little bit, if you would, Mike, about your organization, Alliance Defending Freedom. What exactly is the mission and the purpose of ADF?
ADF is it's just starting its 27th year as an organization, and it was founded by a group of Christian leaders, James Dobson, Bill Bright, D. James Kennedy, Marlon Maddox, and a host of others. And so they saw a need that Christians were silent in the legal arena for too long. And so they formed ADF. It was called Alliance Defense Fund originally. And then about 12 years ago, it became known as Alliance Defending Freedom, because at first it was forming a fund really to help people who were litigating be victorious. But eventually ADF started its own litigation department, and is now the biggest of its kind in the world. We have a staff of about 300, we have about 70 lawyers. We have 5 offices in the United States. And we have, 5 offices in the United States. We have 5 in Europe, and a network of offices in India. There are a lot of cases that we're doing. And we work also in Central and South America. So we deal with religious liberty, right to life, freedom of speech, marriage and LGBT issues, and parental rights. Those are the 5 areas, and our goal is to deliver a generational victory, like the homeschool victory, in all 5 of those areas. We think that America can be a pro-life, free speech honoring, freedom of religion honoring, parental honoring, and marriage honoring nation once again.
Amen. I agree with that. That's awesome. So how do people come to you? How do they get your assistance? How does that system work?
Well, everything that we do is pro bono. So we have a legal intake department, and we get thousands of legal requests every year. And for example, we've been getting about 100 calls from churches a day during this COVID situation. And if we can help you with advice, I think we've helped virtually all of those churches with advice. And we've filed about 10 lawsuits so far in response to the COVID crisis. So most of the people just need advice. But when we find the right kind of case, we can't take everybody's case. It's not a guarantee, but we take a serious look. And then we have a network of 3,000 allied lawyers who will take another layer of cases that we're able to help them. So we're able to handle several hundred cases a year, partly by our staff and partly by our allied lawyers. And so it's a large, mature organization that works in alliance with a lot of other good groups. And if you take all the organizations, Christian and conservative litigation organizations, and add them all together, we're not quite half the size of the ACLU. So we all need to be bigger. And Christians need to say, yeah, you know what, I'll support these legal organizations as much as the leftists support the ACLU, because there's more than enough work for all of us to do, and we need to all grow to be able to meet the challenge of the ACLU, the Southern Poverty Law Center, Planned Parenthood, and many, many others.
So if people want to get in touch with ADF, how would they do that? On your website or what?
On the website, it's adflegal.org.
adflegal.org.
And, you can request legal assistance. Our phone number is there. We have an 800 number. I don't have it memorized, but they can go there and they can call us if they want, or they can submit things over the internet, and we'd be glad to take a look at them. And we'll respond and at least acknowledge every receipt and give you an answer whether we can do your case or not.
So I think we've got on our website, we've got some resources that ADF has prepared, like how to protect your ministry, how to protect your church, that kind of thing. But folks, I want to encourage you to go directly to adflegal.org and support this amazing ministry. And I'm sure there's a donate button or something like that there, right, Mike, where they can help you guys out?
There is. Yeah, we'd appreciate that, but come for the information first, and we'll let God lead you in that department. I
love that spirit. That's fantastic. So you mentioned COVID-19. You mentioned that you've got 100 calls a day. Is that still going on at that level, at that pace?
I think it's simmered down some, but there's still a lot of concern, a lot of interest. We've been advising and litigating a lot of cases. We've the very first case that kind of erupted nationally was when in Mississippi, the city decided to ticket everybody in a small church that had a drive-in service. We defended that church and got it successfully resolved. Some people saw the Benham brothers and their group being arrested for pro-life counseling and praying during this crisis. And we defended the Benham brother ministry and have been able to successfully wrap that up as well. And so we've recently sued the governors of Washington, Oregon, Nevada, the city in Indianapolis, and there are probably some others in the last couple of days. I've been traveling the last couple of days, and so I haven't. I may have missed one or two, but we're going at it where churches are being treated unequally, and we're standing on ready if something happens in California after the Supreme Court decision, and we're seeing if Governor Newsom's going to carry through with his threats, because about 2,000 churches pledged to open last Sunday. I don't know how many did, but we're at the ready to defend many of those churches.
Well, that's fantastic. So just so everybody kind of understands, there was a Supreme Court case, a decision that was announced close to midnight on Friday, last Friday, where the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on, what was it, Mike, a motion for an emergency injunction or something like that coming out of California. Can you tell us more about that?
Right. A church in California sought an extraordinary relief from the Supreme Court, an emergency stay, which is always hard to get. And frankly, I expected the court just simply to turn them down without any opinions. And if they'd have done that, it wouldn't have been really all that newsworthy, because that just means everybody lives to fight another day. But the court issued two opinions. It's not an official opinion of the court. It really should be understood as an explanation of why they didn't take the case right then. But in that explanation, there are some really important principles being discussed. And Chief Justice Roberts ruled against the churches in his explanation of why the case shouldn't be taken. And in there, both opinions were making comparisons. Is this worse than similarly situated secular endeavors? Movie theaters, stores, marijuana shops, liquor stores. Some of them are open, some of them are closed. What's the right comparison? Well, average Americans would be asking the question, why are we comparing it to those kinds of things? Religious freedom is supposed to be a fundamental right, much higher than marijuana shops or liquor stores or even grocery stores in terms of constitutional value. And the reason is a 1990 decision of the Supreme Court, which held that religious freedom cannot be a basis for getting an excuse from a general neutral law. And so the comparisons is an attempt to discover whether this California edict was general and neutral. Because if it's unfair to churches vis-a-vis similar secular organizations, then it's not general and neutral. So that case was called the Smith case, Employment Division versus Smith. And it's a horrible decision that needs to be reversed. And there is a case before the court right now from Philadelphia about Christian foster care and adoption agencies, where whether or not Smith is going to be reversed is on the docket. And so I would encourage people to be praying for that case, that this awful Smith decision would be reversed and religious freedom would once again be treated as it should be, as a paramount freedom, a fundamental right, just like freedom of speech, just like freedom of assembly, just like freedom of the press.
So normally when the Supreme Court rules on something, Mike, that everybody understands that now to be the law of the land. At least that's what we're taught in law school, right? But it sounds like you're saying that we're going to continue to fight on this COVID-19 shutdown as it applies to churches. Help me understand that. How is it that the battle's not totally lost here?
Well, because of the procedural nature of that decision. It was a decision to not take a case. And the opinions written were not a ruling from the court, but an explanation for why they were not going to take the case. And so there is no ruling that says the governor's order is constitutional, you must obey it. Rather, they say on an emergency basis, we're not certain that you can prevail, and so here's why we're not going to take your case. And so the procedural posture does matter. What makes it troubling is it signals what's likely to happen if the real thing comes back. And so what's going to have to happen to have victory is we're going to have a better display of evidence to show why people aren't at risk in the church any more than they are at Walmart. And so just rather than just off-the-cuff comparisons, that's what gets developed when you're doing things on an emergency basis. But you need to have a better developed record that shows why people are just as safe and the safety measures that are in place. And one large church that I know that opened in Southern California last Sunday had extraordinary safety measures in place. So when a court gets a look at those safety measures and then compares it to other things that are permitted, then I think that we have a much better shot in the future. But what really needs to happen is we just get rid of this whole notion of these kind of comparisons. Religious freedom is a first freedom. It's above liquor stores. It's above marijuana shops. It's above dress shops. And it is essential, not just from a day-to-day life, although it is, but it is essential as a fundamental pillar of what this republic is built upon.
I think you just hit on a critical idea there. One of the things that struck me we're here in Colorado, and the governor here issued his emergency orders, and other governors around the nation, and they go through this laundry list of different types of businesses, calling some essential or critical or whatever adjective they want to use, but that governors in this nation would have the temerity to say that worship, houses of worship, are not essential, but other things like liquor stores and pot shops and other places are somehow essential, abortion clinics and so forth. That ought to be offensive, I think, to every freedom-loving American. What say you about that?
I say that it's offensive, it's unconstitutional on the religious freedom side, but I think you pointed out another kind of unconstitutionality of all these orders, and that is they're just making this stuff up. And that the whole idea of a constitutional republic is that the legislature makes the law. And so there's nothing in any statute in any state that says, here's what you do during a pandemic. You shut these kinds of businesses down, you let these kind of businesses be open. Well, if they had done that, there'd be, it would be at least procedurally done correctly, because the legislature made the law and there'd be a more thorough process. But it's just one guy. It's one guy's opinion, the governor unilaterally making law. And effectively, this is martial law that we've been living under. So it's kind of two aspects of martial law are in place. In fact, if you read the actual orders of the governors, they are citing their martial law power for invoking the whole COVID restrictions in most states. There's a few states that are exceptions to that, but in most states, it's not the health code. It's their military authority as commander-in-chief that they're invoking. And we've been living in most states under martial law since March. And now it's just a different kind of martial law where these riots are taking place. But it's very, very dangerous to give any governor that kind of power. These, it was supposed to be a rule of law, not a rule of men. We're living under the rule of men, meaning the governor, whoever that happens to be, that's whose rule you're living under, and nobody else gets to make any rules.
Well, Mike, I know you're an attorney, but you're also, I believe, probably a student of Scripture. And, I've seen a lot of people posting on social media and things like that. Oh, well, Romans chapter 13 says we're supposed to submit to the higher authorities.
Sure.
As a Christian, a believer, as a student of the Constitution, what's your response to that whole idea? Oh, we shouldn't stand up and assert our rights here. We should submit to the shutdown. What do you say about that?
Well, that's the problem with making theology out of one verse. And they're not even reading the verse correctly. The term, you use the correct term, it's authority. It's not officials. We're to always honor officials. They're, governors, kings, whoever's in authority, we're to honor them. That means speak nicely to them, speak respectfully, even when you disagree. We don't need to use pejoratives. We shouldn't swear at them. We should treat them with honor. But in our country, the authority is the Constitution of the United States. That's the authority, the highest law of the land. And so when the lesser authorities violate the higher authority, what do? Well, you do what the Apostle Paul did. When the lesser authorities, the Roman centurions, were going to beat him, despite the fact he hadn't had a trial yet, he appealed and said, look, I'm a Roman citizen. I've got rights here. And you, the lesser authority, can't violate this higher law rule. And the higher law rules can't beat a Roman without a trial, a Roman citizen without a trial. And so he appealed. He was taken to Rome as a result of that. Now, God used that appeal for him to write a whole bunch of scripture. But that's the correct understanding. Daniel is another example. Daniel didn't obey the wrongful order of the king. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't obey the wrongful order of the king. And God protected them. But we Christians need to be presumptively obedient to the law. But there are times when there's a violation of God's law or when there's a violation of higher law, we need to take a different course, as exemplified either by Daniel when it's God's law and by Paul when it's higher law within the system.
Well, so you mentioned earlier, I guess, that Governor Newsom has made some threats out in California. I haven't heard about those. What are you alluding to?
Well, his order and his statements have been that he's going to enforce this against churches. And so we're seeing what he's going to do now. I mean, he's got his hands full with these riots and insurrection that's going on. So that's very, very difficult. But we'll see. So far, I haven't heard of any churches being prosecuted after. I assume that a good number of them did go ahead and open yesterday as they were planning.
All right. Well, I know COVID-19 isn't the only thing on your docket. You've still got your whole host of other lawsuits going on. What can you tell us about, what I want to ask you is, what do you think, other than COVID-19, what do you think the biggest threat to our First Amendment freedoms is in this country today? Is there some agenda, some movement, anything at all like that? What do we need to be concerned about?
Well, there's an effort to silence, deplatform, delegitimize anybody who disagrees with the progressive left's agenda. It's most commonly borne out if you disagree about, for example, same-sex marriage. If you do that, they're trying to shut you down. We represented Jack Phillips there in Colorado, as you well know, and we're at round 3 of that litigation. We won in the Supreme Court of the United States, and that didn't satisfy either an individual who wants to attack Jack or the state of Colorado, but we eventually got Colorado to back off. And there are many other instances in universities all over the country. We've done over 400 cases in public universities around the country where they try to shut down and silence Christian speech, conservative speech, anybody that disagrees with the progressive agenda. In fact, we've defended 2 different cases, one in Michigan, one in Massachusetts. Same basic facts. Students were passing out literature without getting government's permission to do so, which is called a prior restraint, and prior restraints are unconstitutional in this country. And they arrested the students for passing these documents out, and the documents in question were pocket copies of the Constitution of the United States. So we obviously won both of those cases, but universities professors presidents persist in enforcing unconstitutional speech codes. So you see this in a variety of ways, but I think that there's a belief in this country, as exemplified by a professor from Georgetown, Seidman, and a professor at another university, both explicitly wrote that free speech should no longer be honored in this country to the extent it disagrees with progressive objectives. So that's what's being taught in our country, and that's where we're headed. And we have to fight for free speech for everybody. And we have to stand up to it. And so it's a very dangerous doctrine.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, Karen, go ahead.
Thank you. This is just so interesting. And that really brings to mind the situation with social media. And there's just a lot of question, like there's a lot of even President Trump's tweets apparently now are they've got a warning label on them. He has brought up that he is looking at limiting social media. Mike, can you just give us some clarity as to what are the rights of people regarding social media and what is happening with the communication on those platforms right now?
Well, it's complicated because social media are private businesses, and private businesses, just like private universities, don't have to comply with the Constitution. The people that have to comply with the Constitution are the government. And so the government, nobody can come to Patrick Henry College and say, you've got to teach evolution instead of creation. You've got to teach that homosexuality is good rather than that it's sinful. They can't tell us that because at Patrick Henry College, we're a private institution. We can teach what we want to teach. And to that degree, Facebook is private and can make their own rules. Here's the catch, though. Congress gave them a special break, and that is they eliminated the possibility that people could sue them for defamation for something that somebody else posts on Facebook. Because the normal rule, if I went and bought an ad in the New York Times, and in that ad I defamed Mr. Smith, well, Mr. Smith could not only sue me for defamation, he could sue the New York Times also for defamation, because the publisher is responsible. Well, they gave Facebook then an exemption from that rule on this ground. They didn't edit people's speech. Well, the reality is they are editing people's speech. For example, I wrote a post on May the 9th about HR 6666, about contact tracing. And I said that, we were spending $100 billion for no good purpose. The HIPAA privacies weren't applicable. I went through the law and the analysis in detail. And their fact checkers posted a thing and sent it out to 250,000 people read my post. And they sent out a response to thousands and thousands of people saying that my statement was false. False. That's defamation against me. USA Today's fact checkers, working in partnership with Facebook, defamed me by saying that what I said was a lie, which in fact it was absolutely true. And they, within 24 hours, they backed down and then removed that statement that was false. But they have not yet had to go back and communicate to all those thousands of people when they told them it was a lie. And so I believe that one of the elements of President Trump's order was to remove that legal protection from Facebook. So if you're going to edit, and you're going to edit selectively, then you don't get this no defamation rule anymore. You're responsible for everything everybody posts. So if you're going to edit, buddy, get at it. You need to edit a whole lot because there's a whole lot of wild stuff on Facebook. And if you could sue them for that. So really what President Trump did, at least in that component of the order, is saying, we're not giving you any special breaks anymore. We're going to make you live up to the ordinary rules everybody else has to play by. And I think that's a good development.
Mike, how much impact do you think that's the president's order is going to have on social media?
Well, if it sticks, it'll have a lot, because they will have to give up the selective editing that they're doing. There is no doubt that that the editing that's going on is highly selective and biased. And so, if they want to treat people more fairly, then I don't mind them having the protection of that law. But to the extent that they are treating people fairly and they are editorializing in their fact checking, which is what they're doing, then I don't think they should have that protection.
Well, we could go on about these issues all night, and I would love to do that. It's a fantastic conversation. But as we told folks at the beginning, this is an interactive process, and so I bet we have some questions coming in. And Karen, are you getting any questions from viewers there?
Yes, we sure are getting questions. This first one that I'm going to start with, we haven't talked about it too much, is the riots that are happening. And we've got a guest that is asking through chat, are you predicting things will get crazier from now until the election?
Well, I think that's certainly the desire of some people in the riots. I think my good friend Kay James, who's African American, is the president of Heritage Foundation, and she wrote on Facebook today an analysis that says there are four kinds of groups in these riots. There are peaceful protesters that are protesting injustice, and she says more power to them, they're doing the right thing. Then she says there are people that want justice, and they're motivated right, but they think that violence is a good way to achieve justice. And she says they're wrong. Two wrongs don't make a right, and that needs to come to a stop. Then she said there's just opportunists who are just thieves, people who want to smash and grab, and they should be prosecuted. And then finally, and I think the most dangerous element of all, is there are Antifa type agitators. Really, they're engaged in acts of insurrection, which is a very serious crime. It's the civil equivalent of treason. And they are trying to tear down the United States of America. And so this final group is organized. They've got tactics, they've got equipment, they've got funding, they've got communication devices. They are using these other three groups, particularly groups 2 and 3 in that way I listed them, to achieve their objective of trying to have absolute chaos until America crumbles. That's their goal. They're communist agitators, so there's no other way to describe them. And so something has got to happen to stop this. Peaceful protests, I'm all for it. One of the things that could be done about this whole thing, and I alluded to the subject slightly when I was talking about college presidents, police departments, like college presidents, get away with violating people's rights under a doctrine called qualified immunity. And that means unless there's been an exact same situation that has been decided before, and we found this kind of situation to be unconstitutional before, then the police officers or the university presidents who violate people's rights don't have to pay anything because the law wasn't clearly established. Well, try telling that to somebody who's arrested for violating a COVID order. The law is not clearly established. No. You have to obey the law the first time. The day it's on the books, you've got to obey. And the idea that government gets away with these massive violations of the constitutional rights of people just because somebody says it wasn't clearly established in this particular jurisdiction is just injustice personified. And so I think that judges bear some responsibility for the situation in Minnesota that lets police officers think that they don't have to be that careful about people's constitutional rights. If they knew that the moment they violated the Constitution, the sergeants and the captains and the police chiefs would be on top of people a lot more readily, and the protect each other situation that does happen in a lot of police departments would go away. And so I think that we need to get rid of that qualified immunity doctrine, and that would help free speech, that would help religious freedom, and that would certainly help with racial justice as well.
Wow, that's a radical statement legally. You're saying that when people sue for the violation of their civil rights, that they ought to be able to sue the individual actor, the police officer, and on up the chain, not just the government itself. Is that what you're saying?
Well, actually, that's been the law for more than 100 years. And you can't sue the government itself, at least not the state. You can sue the cities in some cases, but you have to sue the actor. And that's really clear. But the Supreme Court, in a case called Harlow versus Fitzgerald, said, well, wait a minute, not every time. If the law is not clearly established, then no. And so this exception has been in place for a few decades now, and it needs to go. And there's a cluster of cases for the Supreme Court right now. We were expecting potential orders on them this morning as to whether the court was going to hear them. There's a cluster of cases asking the court to get rid of qualified immunity. The New York Times editorialized, said the same thing I just said effectively a few days ago, saying that we should get rid of qualified immunity. So this is a very mainstream. This is a place where the ACLU and ADF agree. Qualified immunity should not be allowed in this country. If an official violates the Constitution, they need to face the consequences, period.
Well, I'm sure we've got a lot of other questions. Karen, I can't help myself. I got to jump in and ask this one. Mike, if we've got communist agitators organized, they call themselves Antifa or Antifa, but at their root, they're far extreme left-wing organizations who seek the overthrow of the United States government. That's a fact. What should and what can the President and the Department of Justice, the FBI, what can be done about this, and why is it not being done? Because Antifa has been active for a long time now.
Yeah, well, it's not a crime usually to just talk about these things. It's when you act, that's when they really cross the line. There's some kinds of preparation that amounts to conspiracy, but conspiracies are harder to prove. Well, what's going on today is no mere conspiracy. They're acting. These are active acts of insurrection. I think we should be taking the most aggressive actions, and we sort people out, and we figure out which camp they're in, because their motive does matter. You know, if you're guilty of burglary and thieving, we charge them with burglary and thieving. If you're guilty of rioting, you charge them with rioting. If you're guilty of insurrection and there's facts to back it up with your social media calls and your equipment and all the things that are going on, we charge them with insurrection, which is a very serious crime, and we go after them. And I think that every bit of law enforcement power should be brought to bear. I think up until now, the president's saying, okay, I'm going to give the governors a chance, because properly it is in the governor's responsibility to act first. But they're not acting promptly, and people's lives, their livelihoods, their property, their rights are being trampled on. And at the same time, you know, we've got to do something about the racial injustice. I have 3 black grandchildren. 2 of them were adopted from Haiti, and one of my sons married a couple of years ago, married a beautiful girl from Nigeria. And I have a new grandson born in February who is a dual citizen, the United States and Nigeria. And I have to say that I believe that my black grandchildren face obstacles and threats from official action that are very unlikely to ever face my white grandchildren. And that's not right. And we need to undo those systems, and we need to get at that and I think that the qualified immunity doctrine that I talked about earlier is one step. It's not the only thing that can be done, but we've got to get rid of the sometimes it's not racism in a blatant sense, but racism in an indifference sense is there in many situations. So as anti-Christian bigotry is there, and anti-Semitism is there, and many other forms of bigotry find its way into official action, and we need to fight all of them.
Well,
That's great, Mike. Thank you. Okay, this is coming in from Shelley on Facebook. She says, can an employer make you tell them when you travel outside your state and where you went and if you wore a mask? Do you have to tell them where you're going ahead of time to get time off paid for vacation?
Well, that's complicated and is a matter of, it's going to vary by state law and HIPAA regulations and everything, which I'm not an expert on. And so I don't know what state she lives in, so I can't answer the question with finality, but I'll just give you the general principle. In general, private employers can require anything they want unless there's some affirmative law that says they can't do that. And so if it sounds like her employer is probably doing all those things, and so unless there's some provision in HIPAA, and I'm not aware of any, and unless there's some provision in state law, or unless there's a union contract to the contrary, or an employee manual to the contrary, they can do whatever they want. Private, now, if it's a government employer, all bets are off. Very, very different. But private employers have a lot of latitude in this country, and they should. Now, I don't think they should be using it in such a draconian fashion, but I want to stand up for the rights of private businesses to make rules that they think are reasonable.
Very good, thank you. In our discussion earlier, we were talking about the Supreme Court. This question is coming forth, and I'm really glad it's being asked because a lot of people think that the Supreme Court issued a ruling that goes against churches. And so I think it's really good that we talk about this because a lot of churches or pastors may just like, oh, I may as well give up because the Supreme Court is not going to support me. So the question came in, when SCOTUS issues an opinion, am I correct in assuming it's not the law? Colorado does not have authority to determine when a church should shut down if it's just an opinion. Is that a correct statement?
Not exactly. There are different kinds of Supreme Court opinions. There are final holdings on the merits, and then there are explanations given for why they're not taking cases. And there are some other categories, but those are the two relevant categories here. The decision that was handed down last Friday is not an opinion on the merits. It's not a final ruling of the Supreme Court. They didn't say it is hereby ordered such and such. And so whatever binding effect the majority opinions of the Supreme Court have beyond the litigants themselves, they do always bind the two parties in front of the court. And the two parties have to do what they say. Now, whether it binds anybody else or not is disputed, and it varies on a lot of different things. But here, what the Supreme Court said last Friday is more like a hint. You know, it could be a hint as subtle as an anvil, but it's a hint as to what's going to come in the future if another case comes up like this. And so it's a signal to people like me to say, you better bring something stronger than what was brought this last time, or else you're going to lose. But it's not a final opinion.
Okay, very good. This is coming in from chat, and our guest is asking about the ACLU that you mentioned. Can you describe exactly what the ACLU is, and do they receive government funding?
The ACLU is an organization that's probably 100 years old. It's very, very old, been around a long time. It is left of center and has always been left of center. But they used to have some redeeming qualities. They used to stand up for free speech for everybody, no matter what. They've given up that. They no longer stand for free speech for everybody. And so I used to say that the ACLU, who is behind Roe versus Wade, they support abortion rights. They support same-sex marriage. They have supported, all the getting voluntary prayer out of public schools. They were behind all of that. So they have a deep history in social issues from a leftist perspective. But, I would say that the ACLU used to be right, like a broken clock, 1 minute a day, because they get some things right every once in a while. but that's pretty much gone. They now believe, especially, that gay rights, LGBT issues, are more important than free speech. And they were on the other side, in our case, with Masterpiece Cake Shop, where we were standing up for the free speech rights of a Christian baker, saying, I don't want to deliver a message that violates my values. And the ACLU was there saying, you must deliver the message or the government can punish you. And so that's probably the best snapshot of what the ACLU is like today. If you believe that Jack Phillips should be punished, then you should like the ACLU. If you think Jack Phillips should be allowed to exercise his freedom, then you should get involved with ADF.
Wow.
Well, that's really good. So historically, the ACLU, it's my understanding, Mike, was formed by a group of people that were, many of them were also members of the Communist Party back in the 1930s, and most people don't, they kind of have buried that history, but the strong bind between the ACLU and the hard left is an historical fact.
That's exactly right.
So I think we've got a minute and a half left. Can we squeeze in one more question?
Yeah, this is going to be a quick one. There's so many topics to talk about, but this came in from Ruthie on chat, and she says, why is the media keeping quiet about Hillary Clinton testifying tomorrow?
Well, it doesn't serve their narrative. In fact, your listener just informed me of that. I didn't even know that. So that's fascinating. And so I'm guessing that that's in the lawsuit brought by, I'm trying to think of the name of the conservative organization that does really good work.
Judicial Watch or?
Judicial, yes, that's exactly right, Judicial Watch. And so Tom Fenton is the president. And so, but, you know, the media has a narrative and they want to tell a story and they want to destroy President Trump. They want to destroy people of faith. And so whatever serves that purpose, they'll tell that story.
Well, that's so true. You know, we have people from ADF come to Charis Bible College and teach in the government school, and one of their excellent leaders came and taught. And I remember one time she said, she asked us, is Fox News media or is NBC News media? And all the students were like, yeah, sure. And she said, no, you're wrong. They're actually entertainment. And it's important that we understand that some of these organizations, we think they're objective arbiters of truth, but they actually have an agenda. And so I just want to, we've got a minute and a half left here, Mike. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show tonight and sharing your expertise and knowledge and wisdom with us. I know it's been a great blessing. Folks, I want to encourage all of you who are watching tonight, look up ADF on the website. Again, Mike, that website is adflegal.org, right?
That's right. And
prayerfully consider supporting that ministry and definitely make use of the resources they've got on their website and check out what we've got on ours from ADF and other similar organizations. It's a great thing. We're blessed to have them and we need to support them. And next week, I want to encourage you to tune in and watch the Truth and Liberty livecast next week as we're going to continue talking about the issues of the day and so forth. And if you haven't registered yet for the Truth and Liberty Coalition Conference, it's this coming weekend, July 5th and 6th here in Woodland Park, Colorado. You can check that out on our web. It's going to be an incredible event. Andrew's going to be speaking. James Robison is going to be here Friday night speaking live, as well as E.W. Jackson, Mark Gonzalez, Pastor Mark Cowart, a host of workshops. And what we're doing, folks, is we are equipping you to get involved. So check us out online and we'll see you guys next week.
Join us next time for the Truth and Liberty broadcast. Find tonight's episode and related articles and links at truthandliberty.net. Truth and Liberty is viewer supported. If you'd like to help us continue our live casts, you can make a donation at truthandliberty.net.